Thank you all for being here. Good morning. My name is Elisa Massimino. It's my privilege to have known and worked with Senator McCain on many human rights issues and to be one of the founding board members of the McCain Institute. So on behalf of the board, I want to thank you all for joining us today for this important set of discussions about democracy, human rights, and the power of character-driven leadership. As we prepare to mark next week the 76th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, it's a fitting time for us to reflect on the hard-won wisdom at the heart of that pivotal document, that universal respect for human rights is the necessary foundation of global peace and security. Forged in the cataclysm of World War II and the Holocaust, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights made clear that each of us has a stake in ensuring that people everywhere can enjoy the rights and freedoms essential for a life of dignity. This is a vision of the world worth fighting for, and that is exactly what our keynote speaker this morning has spent his life doing. Leopoldo Lopez is one of Venezuela's most prominent opposition leaders and a fearless advocate for human rights and democracy. His life and career embody the struggle for freedom under one of Latin America's most repressive regimes. Born into a prominent political family, Mr. Lopez studied economics at Kenyon College and has a master's in public administration from Harvard University. His early career was marked by a commitment to public service, which eventually led him to politics. When he was 29 years old, Mr. Lopez was elected mayor of Chacao, one of the most influential districts in Caracas. His tenure as mayor was defined by progressive reforms, particularly in the areas of government transparency, urban development, and human rights. His approach earned him widespread popularity, but it also made him a target for the Chavez government, which was beginning to consolidate power and suppress opposition critics. Mr. Lopez's opposition to the growing authoritarianism under Hugo Chavez and later Nicolas Maduro made him a key figure in Venezuela's democratic resistance. He has been a vocal critic of the erosion of democratic institutions in Venezuela, including the National Assembly, the judiciary, and the media. His commitment to democracy, human rights, and the rule of law has come at great personal cost. In 2014, he was arrested during a series of anti-government protests that rocked Venezuela. His arrest was part of a larger pattern of repression by the Maduro regime, which used imprisonment, torture, and violence to silence opposition figures. Sentenced to more than 13 years in prison after a grossly unfair trial, he endured severe conditions, including solitary confinement and physical abuse and restrictions on communications with his family and his supporters. Yet even from prison, Mr. Lopez continued to be a leading voice for human rights in Venezuela. His case drew international attention. Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International labeled him a prisoner of conscience. Global pressure mounted for his release, and in 2017, he was moved from prison to house arrest. After a dramatic escape in 2020, Mr. Lopez and his family found refuge in Spain, where he has continued to speak out against the Maduro regime. His advocacy is focused not only on the immediate need for democracy and human rights in Venezuela, a fierce struggle as we sit here today, with Maduro seeking to consolidate power through a stolen election, but also on the importance of international solidarity in defending these values. That solidarity is essential. As authoritarians around the world join forces and share strategies, Mr. Lopez is building a network of democracy defenders to counter them, people of courage and determination who work every day to advance the ideals of democracy and human rights under authoritarian regimes. Mr. Lopez's unwavering dedication to these ideals exemplifies the kind of leadership that Senator McCain and the McCain Institute stand for. Leadership that does not shy away from the fight for freedom, no matter the personal cost. As we reflect on the struggle for human rights and democracy here at home, in the Americas, and around the world, we're intensely grateful for leaders like Leopoldo Lopez, who embody the very values that are essential to our shared future: freedom, justice, and the unyielding belief in the dignity of every human being. Please join me in welcoming a friend of the McCain Institute and to all who struggle for democracy and human rights, Leopoldo Lopez.
Thank Thank you, Elisa. Thank you very much for your kind words, and thanks to all of you. Thank you to the McCain Institute for inviting me to address you today. Coming here, I read about many of the moments of Senator McCain, and of course, about his imprisonment and his thoughts when he was in prison. As a political prisoner, he endured solitary confinement, the distance from his family, the heat of being the focus of torture and aggression, and of course, also of thinking about freedom and democracy. And at one point, Senator McCain said that he understood what freedom was when he was in solitary confinement as a prisoner of war. I read this account of his imprisonment recently, but this is exactly how I felt when I was in prison. I spent 7 years of imprisonment, 4 of them in solitary confinement. And during my trial, which was a bogus trial that sentenced me to 13 years, I had the opportunity, the only thing that they allowed me was to write before those closed cases I had. And I had the opportunity of writing a book that later my sister helped me to publish while I was in prison. And I titled that book, In Prison But Free, because I learned what freedom was when I was in freedom. Exactly what Senator McCain said, that he learned what freedom was from its absence. And that's what I learned, because freedom, I realized, is not one thing. Freedom is the sum of many things. It's the possibility to speak out. I was, like many others in Venezuela, millions censored in Venezuela, so that freedom was taken away. The possibility to move around, we were taking away the possibility of moving inside our country. The possibility of assembling. Our organization became, to the regime, an illegal terrorist organization. The possibility of owning property. Our houses, homes have been taken away from the dictatorship. So freedom is a sum of all of those things. And when you don't have them, you fight for them. When you don't have them and you dream for them, that's what you dedicate your efforts and your life to. And that's what the Venezuelan democratic leadership has been doing over the past 20 years. Unfortunately, over these past 20 years, the world has become a more autocratic world. In fact, we're losing the fight. Every year, for the past 20 years, according to Freedom House, according to VDEM, according to the Economist Intelligence Unit, there are more autocracies in the world. Every year, year by year. Today, 5.7 billion individuals in the planet don't live with the same rights that the people in this room have. They are not free. That's 70% of the world's population. 10 years ago, that figure was around 40%. So we can see the drastic increase of autocracy worldwide. And it's not just that autocrats are getting more terrain and more countries are becoming autocratic, but autocrats are working together. They coordinate efforts. They learn from each other. They support each other in many different ways. And this is not an ideological alliance, because it brings together very different ideologies. From the mullahs, theocrats of Iran, to the nationalists from Russia, to the communists from China, to the kleptocrats from Venezuela. There is no ideology there. There is only one thing that binds them together, a common enemy. And that enemy is democracy, and specifically the United States. That's what brings these regimes together. And we have seen this. We have seen this not just in my home country, Venezuela, but I have seen and heard this, that the way autocrats support other autocracies in the world, from my fellow democracy defenders and freedom fighters from Africa, from Asia, from other Latin American countries, from Eastern Europe. But the bright side, what keeps us optimistic, what makes me wake up every day and continue to fight, and I know that this is the conviction of many people, is that the people in these countries want to be free. Global polling says that more than 80% of the people in the world want to be free. But let's go to specific cases. I'll start by my own home country, Venezuela. We had an election in Venezuela on July 28th. With all of the adversities that led us to that election, without the regime allowing the candidate Maria Corina Machado, who won the primaries to run, with a candidate that was completely unknown 3 months before the election and was the only person that was able to be registered, Edmundo Gonzalez, a courageous man, a diplomat, 75-year-old, who assumed the responsibility of being our candidate. The Venezuelan people supported him, voted for democracy, voted for change by 70%. And if those Venezuelans who live outside Venezuela would have been able to vote, that is 5 million people, the difference would have been 90%. Maduro reacted, with no surprise, with a fraud. Within hours, China, Russia, Iran, Belarus, Cuba, Nicaragua, and many other countries supported the fraud of Maduro. Immediately, Maduro deployed a massive repression campaign. More than 2,000 political prisoners we have in Venezuela today. Going to the election, we had 200. More political prisoners than Cuba and Nicaragua together. More political prisoners than they are recognized in Russia. I had the opportunity of talking to a friend of this house, to Vladimir Caramuza, a couple of weeks ago at the Halifax Security Conference, and we were understanding the ways in which these countries are worked together and the similarities of our experience in prison in Russia and in Venezuela, very distant, but very similar. More political prisoners in Venezuela than are in Russia today. But the will to fight is there for the Venezuelan people. And we expect support for the Venezuelan people. We expect that support because that support is for the very core values that this country stands for. The United States stands for core values that are thought to be universal. That means that they have no borders. If all men and women are created equal, that means that they are created equal and they should have their rights respected anywhere in the world. And that's what we are fighting for in Venezuela. And that's why we need the support of the United States and all democracies. We need commitment. We need commitment for the respect of the Venezuelan people's will to make happen. For the past 4 years, unfortunately, the policy of the United States has not prioritized democracy. It prioritized migration, thinking that containing the dictatorship and stabilizing the dictatorship, they were going to contain migration. 800,000 Venezuelans crossed the border over the past 4 years. So obviously that you failed. They gave Maduro incentives. They released the nephews that were being in process for narcotics. They released the main crony of Maduro that was facing money laundering cases with a presidential pardon, Alex Saab. They gave Maduro oil licenses. All of these incentives thinking that Maduro was going to respect the will of the people in the election. It didn't happen. So now we need a response to that. Very concrete. We, the Venezuelan people, expect that Edmundo Gonzalez is fully recognized as president-elect and that there is a commitment to make that recognition beyond just the United States government. We also expect that Maduro is held accountable for the crimes, him and his network, that he is the subject of pressure and sanctions. The people who committed the fraud should be sanctioned. The people, from the generals to the people who are actually killing people, imprisoning and torturing the freedom fighters and democracy defenders in Venezuela, should be sanctioned. Those responsible for the massive corruption in Venezuela should be sanctioned. And also, the cash flow to the Maduro regime should be limited, because today, a good part of the cash flow that Maduro uses for his repression is coming from the licenses that were given to Chevron and other oil companies. We expect commitment, and I can tell you that the commitment of the Venezuelan people is there. We have Edmundo Gonzalez as president-elect. We have Maria Corina Machado in hiding and leading the resistance in Venezuela. And we have millions of Venezuelans who are willing to fight. And we are not alone. What is happening in Venezuela is not only happening in Venezuela. As we speak, it's also happening in places like Georgia. Last night, the leader of the Georgian opposition was abducted, imprisoned. The Georgian people are in the streets. The Georgian people are fighting and protesting for their will and their right to live in a free society away from the influence of Russia. This is also happening in Mozambique as we speak after they stole an election. And it also happened some years ago in Belarus. It happened in Uganda. It happened in Thailand. It happened in Burma. So there are many countries where there are elections and people are winning, but they are left alone. So we need a commitment from democratic governments, from the democratic civil societies, from organizations like the McCain Institute and others who are willing to side with the democracy defenders, the freedom fighters, and the people in the world that want to be free. Because let's make no mistake, the people living in autocratic countries want to be free, and we need the support. And winning for democracy and freedom is a win for democracy here in the United States and in any democratic country. It's foolish to think that there is no impact in having more autocratic countries all over the world and that would not affect the United States or any other democratic country. A win for democracy in Venezuela, in Georgia, in Belarus, in Mozambique, in Uganda, in Nicaragua, in Cuba, will be a win for democracy in the United States. And if you care about specific issues like climate change or human rights, well, the core and the source of many of those problems is coming from autocratic regimes. So I commend and applaud the work of the McCain Institute, the support it has given to democratic defenders and freedom fighters, human rights defenders throughout all of these years. I hope you can continue to do this, but we need to understand that there is not a single government, a single organization, a single individual that will be capable of winning the fight for freedom and democracy. We need a movement. We need a network. We need commitment from government, policymakers, NGOs, institutions, from the private sector, from the universities, from researchers, from individuals, in a fight that will make the world a much better world for us, for our kids, and it will uphold the values that make this country what it is. The United States, it's a beacon of democracy, of hope, of human rights, and of the possibility of winning the fight against autocracy. So let's fight with optimism. Let's fight with the understanding that only through our works, only through our commitment, we will make democracy happen in our countries. Thank you very much to the McCain Institute. Thanks to all of you, and let's fight and win for freedom. Thank you very much.